Welcome to Learnivo English Stories, where we learn English through the real journeys of extraordinary people. Today's story is about a man who didn't just build computers. He built a new way of thinking. A man who believed that technology could be art, that design could be emotion, and that one small idea could change the world. He was fired from his own company, fought cancer, and came back stronger than ever. He taught us that failure can be the beginning of greatness and that passion, not logic, creates innovation. This is the complete story of Steve Jobs, the innovator who changed technology. Let's begin.
Steve Jobs, the innovator who changed technology. Prologue, the man who saw the future.
When you think about the devices that shape our lives, the iPhone in your hand, the tablet on your desk, the smooth design of a laptop, you are in some way touching the imagination of one man. A man who believed that technology should be as beautiful as art. A man who refused to accept good enough. That man was Steve Jobs. He didn't invent the computer. He didn't invent the phone. But he reinvented the way humans feel about technology. He changed how we listen to music, how we work, how we talk, and how we dream. But his story is not just one of success. It's also about pain, rejection, courage, failure, and rebirth. It's the story of how a small adopted boy who once felt unwanted ended up creating products loved by the whole world. Let's begin.
Chapter 1. A Child Given Away.
Steve Jobs was born on February 24, 1955, in San Francisco, California. His biological parents were two young students, Joanne Schiebel and Abdul Fattah Jandali. They were both brilliant, full of hope, but not ready for a baby. So they made the hardest choice of their lives, to give him up for adoption. The baby was taken in by Paul and Clara Jobs, an ordinary couple from Mountain View, California. Paul was a mechanic, quiet but skilled, the kind of man who could fix anything. Clara worked as an accountant. She was gentle, kind, and patient. They weren't rich, but their small home was full of love. Paul would spend weekends in the garage building things with his hands. He often called little Steve to help. He showed him how to sand wood until it was smooth, how to make sure even the back of a cabinet, the part no one sees, was finished perfectly. He told his son, if you're going to do something, do it right. That simple lesson stayed with Steve for life. As a child, Steve was curious, energetic, and sometimes rebellious. He asked endless questions. He wanted to understand why things worked, not just that they worked. One day he took apart a radio just to see what was inside. His father wasn't angry. He smiled and said, "Good. Now put it back together." Steve tried, failed, tried again, and finally made it work. That moment lit a spark in him. The joy of building, of solving problems, of turning imagination into reality. But not everything in his childhood was calm. He was adopted, and sometimes he felt different from other kids. He once asked his parents, "So I was given away?" His mother hugged him and said, "No, you were chosen." That word, chosen, meant everything to him.
Chapter 2. The Curious Boy.
At school, Steve was intelligent but impatient. He hated boredom. When he understood something, he didn't want to wait for others. He often got into trouble for playing pranks or speaking his mind too boldly. But one teacher, Mrs. Hill, saw his potential. She noticed his sharp curiosity and decided to challenge him. She gave him special projects, small rewards, and constant encouragement. He later said that if it weren't for her, he might never have survived elementary school. At home, the Jobs family moved to Mountain View, a sunny, growing area that would later become the heart of Silicon Valley. Around him, Steve saw engineers and innovators, people experimenting with circuits, wires, and early computers. The air felt electric with invention. When he was around 12, Steve joined a local electronics club called the Hewlett-Packard Explorer Club. There he saw his first real computer, a huge machine with blinking lights. It wasn't beautiful, but it was alive. He was fascinated. He said later, "When I saw that computer, I fell in love. It was like a bicycle for the mind." From that moment, he knew he wanted to change the world through technology.
Chapter 3. The Two Steves.
At Homestead High School, Steve met a boy named Steve Wozniak. Woz, as everyone called him, was shy, warm, and incredibly good at building electronic gadgets. Jobs was the opposite, bold, creative, and persuasive. They quickly became friends. Woz liked designing, Jobs liked dreaming. Together they made small inventions, and one day they made something that changed their lives: the Blue Box. It was a small device that could trick the phone system and make free long-distance calls. Illegal? Yes. But for them, it was proof of something bigger. Jobs said, "If we could build this little thing, we could build anything." That idea, two kids challenging the system, became their shared identity. They sold a few blue boxes to friends and felt like heroes. And though it was a small, rebellious project, it taught them their first great lesson. Technology wasn't just for companies, it was for people.
Chapter 4. The Dropout.
After high school, Steve Jobs went to Reed College in Oregon. It was expensive, and his adoptive parents spent all their savings to send him there. But after just 6 months, he dropped out. He said later, "I didn't see the value in it. I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I didn't want to waste my parents' money." But he didn't leave completely. He stayed on campus, sleeping on friends' floors, eating at the Hare Krishna temple, and attending classes that truly interested him. One of those classes was calligraphy, the art of beautiful writing. He learned about different typefaces, about the space between letters, about balance and form. He had no idea it would ever be useful. But 10 years later, when he designed the first Macintosh computer, those same lessons gave the world elegant digital fonts. He said, "You can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backward." At that time, he was just following his curiosity, trusting it would make sense someday.
Chapter 5. India and Insight.
In 1974, Jobs traveled to India in search of spiritual meaning. He had been reading about meditation and Zen Buddhism, and he wanted to understand life beyond money and machines. He walked barefoot through villages, shaved his head, and lived simply. He learned patience, mindfulness, and the power of intuition, the quiet voice that tells you what's right before logic catches up. When he came back, he was thinner, calmer, but more focused than ever. He said, "Intuition is a very powerful thing. It's more important than intellect. That belief, to follow your gut, not just data, would guide every major decision in his career."
Chapter 6. The Garage and the Dream.
Back home, Wozniak had built a small computer, just a board with a keyboard that could show text on a TV screen. Jobs looked at it and saw the future. He said, "Woz, people are going to want this." They started building more in the garage of Steve's parents' home. That small, cluttered garage became the birthplace of one of the greatest companies in history, Apple Computer Incorporated. They sold their personal items for funding. Jobs sold his Volkswagen van. Woz sold his calculator. They worked day and night. They didn't have money for a factory, so they assembled each board by hand. The smell of solder filled the air. The radio played in the background. Friends came to help, laughing and dreaming together. Their first product was the Apple One, simple, functional, and made with love. They sold 50 units to a local store, the Byte Shop. Each one took hours to build, test, and pack. In 1976, Apple was officially born. The logo, a rainbow-colored apple, symbolized creativity and joy. Jobs said, "We're not making machines. We're making tools for the mind."
Chapter 7. The Birth of Apple.
In 1977, Apple released the Apple II. It was colorful, user-friendly, and ready for ordinary people, not just engineers. Schools, families, and small businesses began buying it. Within a few years, Apple went public, making Jobs a millionaire at just 25. But fame didn't satisfy him. He wanted perfection. He wanted beauty. He wanted to make something revolutionary, a computer that could think and feel like art. He began working on a new project, the Macintosh. He demanded everything to be perfect, from the sound of the startup chime to the feel of the mouse. He pushed his team hard, often shouting, arguing, and inspiring in equal measure. People said working for him was like living inside a storm, but they also said they had never achieved so much in their lives.
Chapter 8. Fame and Fire.
The Macintosh launched in 1984 with one of the most famous commercials ever made. A woman smashing a screen that symbolized conformity. The message was clear: Apple is here to change everything. The crowd at the launch cheered wildly. Jobs stood on stage, smiling like a magician revealing his masterpiece. He said, "We're introducing the Macintosh. It's insanely great." But behind the applause, trouble was brewing. Inside Apple, tension grew. Jobs was brilliant but difficult. He demanded perfection, and not everyone could keep up. The board of directors began to lose faith in his leadership. In 1985, just 1 year after the Macintosh launch, Steve Jobs was forced out of the company he founded. He was only 30. He said later, "It was devastating, but it was also the best thing that ever happened to me."
Chapter 9. The Fall.
Imagine building something with your heart and soul and then being told to leave it behind. That's what happened to Steve Jobs. He had poured everything into Apple, his time, his creativity, his identity, and suddenly it was gone. He walked out of the building he had founded, holding nothing but a box of memories. The media called it the end of Steve Jobs. But it was not the end. It was a rebirth. He took a deep breath and said, "I'm free again. I can start over." And that's exactly what he did.
Chapter 10. The Wanderer, Next, and Pixar.
In 1985, Steve started a new company called Next. His goal was to build the perfect computer for universities and researchers. It was powerful, beautifully designed, and far ahead of its time, but too expensive. Next didn't make money, but it became a laboratory of ideas. Years later, Apple would use Next technology to build its modern software. At the same time, another opportunity appeared, one that had nothing to do with computers. In 1986, Jobs bought a small graphics company from George Lucas for $10 million. The company's name was Pixar. At first, Pixar made computer graphics for advertisements and studios, but Jobs believed animation could be reborn through technology. He funded them, supported their artists, and waited. For years, Pixar struggled. Jobs invested more money, sometimes nearly all he had left. But he kept believing. Then in 1995, everything changed. Pixar released a film called Toy Story, the first full-length movie made entirely with computers. It was a masterpiece, funny, emotional, human. It became an instant global hit. People around the world fell in love with Woody and Buzz Lightyear, and Pixar became the new heart of animation. Steve Jobs was back, not as a computer maker this time, but as a storyteller. He once said, "The most powerful person in the world is the storyteller." Through Pixar, he helped create not just films, but emotions. Movies like Finding Nemo, The Incredibles, and Up. Each one carried the same magic he had always believed in: simplicity, clarity, and heart.
Chapter 11. The Return of the Visionary.
In 1996, Apple was in trouble. Its products were confusing, its direction unclear. The company that Jobs had founded was close to bankruptcy. And so, in a twist of fate, Apple bought Next, bringing Steve Jobs back home after 11 long years. He returned quietly at first, as an advisor, but soon he was back in control. He walked into Apple's headquarters, looked around and said, "There's too much here that doesn't matter." He canceled most projects, simplified the product line, and focused on a few things done perfectly. He told his team, "Let's make one computer for consumers and one for professionals." That's it. In 1998, Apple released the iMac, a colorful, friendly, all-in-one computer designed like nothing before. It looked like candy, sounded like music, and felt alive. It was a symbol of rebirth. Sales exploded. Apple was back. From that moment, Jobs' vision became clearer than ever. Technology must serve emotion. He said, "People don't know what they want until you show it to them." And Apple began to show the world, one product at a time, what the future could feel like.
Chapter 12. The Revolution in Your Pocket.
In the early 2000s, Steve Jobs looked at the way people listened to music. They carried CDs, tapes, and clunky MP3 players. He saw confusion and an opportunity. He asked his team, "How many songs can we put in your pocket?" The answer came in 2001. The iPod. Small, simple, white. It became a global phenomenon. 1,000 songs in your pocket, the slogan said. But it was more than that. It was freedom, simplicity, and joy. The white earphones became a symbol of a generation. With the iPod came iTunes, an online store that changed the music industry forever. Suddenly, artists and listeners were connected directly. But Steve wasn't done. While the world was celebrating the iPod, he was already thinking bigger. He wanted to reinvent the phone. In 2007, standing on a stage in his signature black turtleneck, jeans and sneakers, he held up a small rectangular device and said, "Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone." That was the birth of the iPhone. It combined a phone, a music player, and an internet browser into one magical device. People gasped. They clapped. They didn't know it yet, but the iPhone would change not only how people communicate, it would change culture itself. Within a few years, it replaced cameras, watches, maps, wallets. Even computers for many people, it became an extension of life itself.
Chapter 13. Simplicity and Perfection.
Jobs believed that design was not decoration, it was meaning. He said, "Design is not just what it looks like and feels like. Design is how it works." Inside Apple, he pushed every team to think small, think pure, think human. He hated buttons, loved symmetry, and obsessed over every detail. The curve of the iPhone's corners, the sound it made when turned on, the way the box opened. He often said, "We have to make it so simple that even a child can use it." His designers sometimes worked for weeks on a single icon. His engineers rebuilt prototypes again and again, and yet everyone who worked for him, even those who argued, admitted one thing: he made them better. He wasn't just building products, he was building experiences, things that felt alive, that made people feel proud to use them. Under his leadership came the iMac, iPod, iPhone, iPad, and even the first steps toward the Apple Store, a place where technology was displayed like art.
Chapter 14. The Fight Inside.
In 2003, just as Apple reached its peak, Jobs received devastating news. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, a rare form that, at first, seemed treatable. Doctors recommended surgery immediately, but Steve, always guided by intuition, tried alternative treatments first, a mix of diets and spiritual healing. For 9 months, he delayed the operation. Later, he regretted it. He finally had surgery, and for a while, things seemed stable. He returned to work, thinner but as passionate as ever. He continued to lead product launches, walking onto the stage with the same confidence, his energy filling the room even as his body weakened. He said to his team, "Remember, you are already naked. There's no reason not to follow your heart." Those who worked with him noticed the change. He had become softer, more reflective, but still driven by the same purpose: to leave behind something meaningful.
Chapter 15. The Legacy Grows.
Even as his health declined, the pace of innovation at Apple didn't stop. He introduced the iPad, a tablet that many thought was unnecessary until they held it in their hands and realized how natural it felt. He oversaw the new Apple headquarters design, a circular spaceship surrounded by trees and glass, a place meant to inspire future generations. At home, he spent time with his wife, Lorene, and their children, Reed, Aaron, and Eve. He loved them deeply, even though his relationship with family had always been complicated. He had another daughter, Lisa, from a previous relationship, and for years their connection was painful and distant. But as he aged, he worked hard to rebuild it. He once said, "Being a father is the most important thing I've done." Despite his fame, he lived simply, eating fruit, meditating, and walking barefoot around his garden. He was still that same boy who loved clarity and simplicity.
Chapter 16. The Final Curtain.
In 2011, after years of battling cancer, Steve knew his time was coming to an end. He resigned as Apple's CEO that August, passing the leadership to Tim Cook, but continued to advise from home. On October 5, 2011, surrounded by his family, Steve Jobs passed away at the age of 56. His last words were quiet but powerful. "Oh, wow, oh, wow, oh, wow." The world mourned. Thousands gathered outside Apple stores, leaving flowers, apples with bites taken out, and notes that said, "Thank you, Steve." President Obama said, "Steve was among the greatest American innovators, brave enough to think differently, bold enough to believe he could change the world." He did. Epilogue: What he left behind. Steve Jobs left more than products. He left a philosophy, a way of thinking. He taught the world that technology isn't about numbers or speed. It's about creativity, empathy, and simplicity. He said, "The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do." His story reminds us that even those who fail, who fall, who are misunderstood, can still leave something eternal. Today, every time a screen lights up, every time a song plays through your earbuds, every time design meets emotion, a small part of Steve Jobs' spirit lives on. He turned machines into poetry, ideas into revolutions, and dreams into reality. He was and will always be the man who made the future feel human.
Thank you for listening to Learnivo, English Stories. If this story inspired you, remember, the world changes through imagination and through the courage to think differently. Steve Jobs once said, "Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life." His story reminds us that every failure hides a lesson and every dream can become reality if we never stop believing. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share Learnivo with others who love learning English through real stories. Until next time, keep learning, keep dreaming, and stay curious about the world.